Topic near and dear to my heart. This is a great honor. This is the first, I believe, the first U.S. presentation of the final primary outcomes of the Saval pivotal trial. These slides were previously presented at CIRSE approximately 4 weeks ago by Hans Overhagen. These are my disclosures. I do sit on the advisory board for Boston Scientific, which was the sponsor of this study. So why drug-eluting stents? I think all of us have struggled with this issue. Most of the conversation for the last case was talking about recoil, and I think many of us have dealt with the issues of recoil in the infrapopliteal circulation. There's also a wealth of previous literature and randomized trials demonstrating efficacy and safety of balloon expandable drug-eluting stents in the below-knee circulation. I've listed several of them here. This includes 2 randomized trials comparing coronary drug-eluting stents to bare metal stents and 2 randomized trials comparing coronary drug-eluting stents to balloon angioplasty. At the same time, we've now seen completed 4 failed randomized controlled trials of drug-coated balloons in the infrapopliteal circulation. And so we are struggling with how to identify the best anti-proliferative strategy for patients with chronic limb-threatening ischemia. Not to belabor the point, but there have been numerous meta-analyses published demonstrating, again, feasibility and certainly safety and efficacy for coronary drug-eluting stents in the infrapopliteal circulation, demonstrating in a pooled analysis improvement in terms of freedom from TLR, freedom from restenosis, and even freedom from amputation when coronary balloon expandable drug-eluting stents are used in, again, the below-knee circulation. So the Saval drug-eluting vascular stent system was a novel implant designed specifically for the treatment of CLI or CLTI. It is a nitinol self-expanding stent. It is a small diameter implant. The specific implant that was studied for this trial was 3.5 millimeters by 80 millimeters in length. The polymer and paclitaxel formulation was virtually identical to the Alluvia platform, which has been so successful clinically in the above-knee circulation. The global principal investigator was Jihad Mustafa, principal investigator in Europe, again, Hans von Overhagen, US principal investigator Patrick Garrity, and Japanese principal investigator Masato Nakamura. It was a global prospective multi-center randomized controlled trial in a 2-to-1 randomization scheme comparing the Saval drug-eluting stent, as I've just shared with you, versus plain balloon angioplasty. 39 study centers in the US, Europe, and Japan completed the trial. A total of 201 subjects were enrolled. Rutherford 4 and 5 patients were able to be screened and participate in the study. The study had 2 primary endpoints. The efficacy endpoint was primary patency, as demonstrated by duplex ultrasound with an independently adjudicated core lab to demonstrate this efficacy endpoint at a 12-month follow-up in the absence of clinically driven TLR or surgical bypass of the target lesion. The safety endpoint was an aggregate of major adverse events defined by above-knee amputation of the index limb, major reintervention, and 30-day mortality. Just to dive into the inclusion criteria, this becomes important as we look to the future trials. Again, Rutherford 4 and 5 were able to be enrolled. Specifically, wounds had to be confined to the toes and forefoot. Plantar wounds were excluded. There had to be a either stenotic or restenotic target lesion in the below-knee circulation. P3 was not allowed to be included in this study. And he had to have a single target lesion vessel in a single limb to be able to be enrolled. The lesion had to be greater than 70% stenotic by a visual assessment. The total target lesion length could be up to 140 millimeters, so for a total of 2 stents. And again, the reference vessel diameter ranged from 2.5 millimeters to 3.25 millimeters. Patients who were excluded, any patient with a planned or prior major amputation, any patient with previous surgery, especially ipsilateral crural bypass surgery, any patient with a previous implanted stent in the target vessel, failed angioplasty less than 60 days prior, essentially chronic kidney disease of CKD5 or greater, and a life expectancy less than 1 year. So again, the study successfully completed enrollment just over 2 years ago. 130 patients comprising 142 lesions were enrolled in the Saval arm, and 71 patients comprising 76 lesions were enrolled in the angioplasty arm. Unfortunately, a follow-up led into the first wave of the pandemic, and there were a number of patients due to multiple issues that fell out of the follow-up period. And so the primary endpoint that I'm about to share with you from a safety perspective represents 119 of the 130 patients in the DES group and 64 patients out of the 71 patients in the angioplasty group. The efficacy endpoint, unfortunately, represents 103 patients out of the 130 patients in the Saval group and 50 patients out of the 71 patients in the angioplasty group. The patient characteristics were virtually identical. You see major demographics and medical comorbidities, which are very, very typical for a CLTI population. There were no statistical differences between the groups, not only by medical comorbidities, by racial background, and by a previous history of peripheral arterial disease. Of note, the lesion lengths were just under 7 centimeters, specifically 68 millimeters in length. This is objectively the longest randomized stent trial for the below-knee circulation in terms of a lesion length. There was a statistically significant difference in terms of the rate of moderate to severe calcification between the two groups. Specifically, the Saval group had a much more severe calcification. And then the lesion breakdown in terms of the anatomy, there was no statistical difference between the allocations and the two groups. Procedural success was 100% for the stent group, 98.7% of the angioplasty group. Procedural success, again, 100%, 98.6% in the angioplasty group. IVUS was used fairly liberally. Some of us would argue not liberally enough. The bailout stent rate in the angioplasty group was incredibly low, which I think is a testament to the principal investigators and the trial organizers to keep bailout very, very low in this. And then the proximal inflow lesion was treated in between a third and 40% of the cohort. The primary endpoints are as follows. From an efficacy endpoint, the primary patency of the Saval cohort was 68% at 12-month follow-up. The primary patency in the angioplasty cohort at 12-month follow-up was 76%. There was no statistical difference between these two groups, and as a result, this did not meet the primary efficacy endpoint for superiority over balloon angioplasty. The safety endpoint was a freedom from major adverse events for the Saval group was 91.6% at 12-month follow-up, 95.3% for the angioplasty group. And again, there was no statistical difference between this, and again, this did not meet the primary efficacy endpoint for safety. On a positive note, there was no difference in terms of freedom from all-cause mortality. You can see the rates here. It was approximately 90% for both arms out to 12 months, certainly addressing any concerns about the use of paclitaxel in the below-knee circulation. So to conclude, the Saval study did not meet its primary effectiveness and safety endpoints, unfortunately. This is another negative infrapopliteal anti-proliferative study, which we will all struggle with how to get through this and lead on to the next level of evidence. Patient follow-up, as mandated by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, will continue through years. In office visits and vital status assessment out to 5 years. Obviously, there is a continued need to provide minimally invasive treatments and to innovate so that we can improve the care that we are providing to our patients. On a closing note, many of us are struggling with how to resolve the findings of this study. I put some ideas just to start conversation. Is the finding of the Saval pivotal trial related to poor clinical follow-up? Is it solely an extent of the pandemic? And if we had better follow-up, we would not see the results that I've shared with you this morning. Is this finding related to the scaffold? And again, this is the first randomized trial of a self-expanding scaffold in the below-knee circulation with an anti-proliferative agent. Is it related to the polymer? Is it related specifically to the anti-proliferative agent that was studied here? Would another anti-proliferative agent lead to a different result? And then lastly, is it related to the lesion characteristics? If the lesion characteristics had been more homogeneous between the study group and the control group, would we have seen a different result? I've summarized all of the 12-month data just as a mode of conversation moving forward. But I think there's a lot of more work to be done for scaffolds in the Bologna circulation. Again, the Saval is the longest lesion that's been studied in this region. And I think we should use all of this data in terms of 12-month patency for pivotal randomized trials to design the next set of trials moving forward. Thank you all for your attention.